All right, welcome to another deep dive. Buckle up, because today we're traveling way back in time.
Back to the ancient world.
Exactly. We're going to be exploring how same-sex relationships were viewed and depicted in some of the world's oldest cultures. Ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the societies that produced the Hebrew Bible.
We'll be looking at a diverse range of sources to try and piece together these ancient perspectives.
Oh yeah, we've got a fascinating mix to work with. We're talking ancient laws, poems, myths.
Even letters from early Christian communities.
It's like a historical puzzle, right?
It is, and we're trying to understand how people viewed love, relationships.
And sexuality.
Exactly, but remember, it's not about judging the past by today's standards.
No judging. We're here to understand, to see things through their eyes. So first stop on our journey, Mesopotamia, land of epic stories, powerful gods.
A really unique worldview.
Where do we even begin?
Well, in Mesopotamia, everything revolved around the gods. They had this whole pantheon, a whole group of gods and goddesses. And these gods, they were involved in every aspect of life.
I mean, everything.
Including sexuality.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so the gods were pretty open-minded.
That's one way to put it. Take Ishtar, for example.
Ishtar.
And she was this amazing goddess of love and war. And she was associated with all kinds of relationships.
All kinds, you mean?
Including same-sex ones. There were even temple prostitutes, both men and women, who played a role in her worship.
Whoa, temple prostitutes. That sounds different.
Well, it was a different time, for sure. But it shows you that same-sex acts were definitely on the radar in ancient Mesopotamia.
Okay, so you're telling me, like, the gods themselves might have influenced how people viewed same-sex relationships.
It's a possibility. And then we have these Mesopotamian law codes. These are super interesting.
Law codes. Like rules about relationships.
One of them actually makes distinctions between different types of same-sex relationships.
Really? Distinctions how?
They use different terms like asinu and kurgaru, basically words for different roles in these relationships.
Okay, so like different categories.
Yeah, and the penalties for certain acts, they depended on the social status of the people involved.
So like who was involved mattered?
Big time. For example, if a free man slept with an asinu, the punishment was harsher than if he slept with a slave from his own house.
Wow. They were really thinking about the social dynamics, right?
Exactly.
It sounds like they were trying to create some kind of order within their society.
It wasn't just about acceptance or rejection. There were all these social and legal factors at play.
Okay, so we've got gods, we've got laws. What about literature? I remember reading about that epic story of Gilgamesh.
Ah, the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest stories in the world.
Full of adventure, right?
Adventure, friendship, and the fear of death. And there's this intense bond between Gilgamesh, the king, and his friend Enkidu.
Yeah, I remember that. They go through so much together. Their friendship is almost, well, it's more than just friendship, right?
Right. The story uses really powerful language to describe their relationship.
Like what kind of language?
Sometimes even words that are used for romantic love.
Whoa, hold on. Really?
Think about it. Enkidu is created to be Gilgamesh's equal. They wrestle naked, and Gilgamesh is absolutely devastated when Enkidu dies.
He even goes on that crazy quest for immortality, all because he can't bear to lose anyone else.
Exactly. It's powerful stuff. And while the story doesn't explicitly call their relationship sexual, the depth of their bond and the language used, well, it definitely leaves room for different interpretations.
Okay, so in Mesopotamia, we've got gods who are, well, pretty free with their relationships, laws that regulate certain acts. And this epic story about an incredibly close bond between two men.
It's complicated.
It is. It's a lot more nuanced than just saying they accepted or condemned same-sex relationships, right?
Right, it's all about context, and that's what makes studying the past so fascinating. It challenges our assumptions and shows us that things are rarely black and white. All right, so from the bustling cities and epic tales of Mesopotamia, we now journey to the land of pharaohs and pyramids.
Ancient Egypt, a civilization known for its obsession with order and balance. Think about those perfectly aligned pyramids, those intricate hieroglyphs. Everything seems so carefully structured.
Exactly, and that emphasis on order, on balance, it really permeated their entire worldview.
So how did that worldview, that Egyptian way of thinking, influence their views on same-sex relationships?
Well, it's interesting because unlike the Mesopotamians, the ancient Egyptians didn't have specific words for homosexuality in their language.
No specific terms. So how do we even begin to understand their perspective?
We have to look for clues. Clues in their mythology, their historical records, their art. It's like detective work piecing together fragments of evidence.
Speaking of clues, what about that myth about Seth and Horus? That one's always kind of thrown me for a loop.
Ah, yes, the tale of Seth and Horus, a story full of drama and, well, attempted divine assault.
It's a wild one. For those who might not be familiar, can you give us a quick recap?
Sure. So Seth, the god of chaos and disorder, tries to, let's just say, force himself upon Horus, the son of Osiris. This conflict, it escalates into a cosmic courtroom battle.
With the Ennead, that council of 9 powerful gods acting as the ultimate judges. Talk about high stakes.
It was a big deal, and the outcome of this trial, it would determine the rightful ruler of Egypt. Now, you mentioned that there wasn't a specific word for homosexuality in ancient Egyptian, so how do we interpret this story?
Right, because on the surface, it kind of seems like, well,
Like a pretty clear example of a same-sex act, right?
yeah.
But remember that Egyptian emphasis on order and balance. They called this concept Mut. And Mut, it was more than just a concept. It was like the fundamental principle of the universe. It was about maintaining harmony, justice, and rightness in all things.
Okay, so everything had to be in balance. But how does that connect to Seth and Horus?
Well, for the ancient Egyptians, anything that disrupted Ma'at, that disrupted this cosmic balance, was seen as a serious offense, a threat to the entire world.
So Seth's actions, his attempted assault on Horus, was seen as a violation of Ma'at.
Precisely. It wasn't necessarily about judging the act itself as inherently wrong, but rather about how it disrupted the established order.
So maybe not the most accepting view, but it makes sense within their specific worldview. But wait a minute, what about that story about Pharaoh Pepi II and his general Sisson? That always makes me wonder.
Ah, yes, Pharaoh Pepi II, known for his long reign and, well, some rather scandalous rumors.
Scandalous. Give us the juicy details.
Well, it seems that Pepi II was known to sneak out of the palace at night, and on one occasion, someone followed him. And guess where they ended up?
Where? Don't leave me hanging.
The house of his general, Sisson. And let's just say the ancient texts, they hint at something a little more than a friendly visit between pharaoh and general.
Ooh, sounds like even pharaohs had their secrets. So maybe within the pharaoh's inner circle, same-sex relationships were viewed differently. Maybe there was more tolerance than we might assume.
It's certainly possible. Unfortunately, with ancient history, we often have to piece together fragments and make educated guesses, but that's part of what makes it so fascinating.
All right, so we've explored the land of powerful gods in Mesopotamia and the realm of pharaohs and cosmic order in Egypt. Now, let's turn our attention to a text that has had a profound impact on Western civilization and on how people have viewed same-sex relationships.
The Hebrew Bible.
The Hebrew Bible, a complex and multifaceted text that's been interpreted in countless ways throughout history.
And before we dive in, it's important to acknowledge that the Hebrew Bible has been used to both condemn and to affirm same-sex relationships. So we're going to try to approach it with as much nuance and historical understanding as possible.
Exactly. Context is key here. We need to remember that these texts were written in a specific time and place with their own unique cultural and social norms. So let's get right to it. What about those passages that people often cite when condemning same-sex relationships? Where do those fit into the bigger picture?
All right, so we're picking up our conversation about the Hebrew Bible, and specifically those passages that are often brought up in discussions about same-sex relationships.
Yeah, these are the verses that a lot of people point to, and they say, see, the Bible condemns it. Case closed.
Right, and it's usually two key texts that get the most attention. First, you have Leviticus chapters 18 and 20, which are part of what scholars call the Holiness Code.
Okay, the Holiness Code. So what's the deal with that? What's it all about?
Well, as the name suggests, it's all about holiness. It's a set of rules and rituals for the Israelites, a guide to living in a way that's considered pure and set apart. And a big part of that is maintaining order within families and clans, keeping those boundaries clear.
Boundaries. Okay, so where do those verses about same-sex acts fit into all of this?
Well, both Leviticus 18 and 20, they have a verse that says, a man shouldn't lie with a man as with a woman. It calls it an abomination.
Abomination. That's pretty strong language.
Yeah, it is. And that word abomination, it's important. It pops up a lot in the Holiness Code. And it's often used to describe things that are ritually impure or that disrupt that social order, the way they believed things should be structured.
So it's not necessarily about morality in the way we might think about it today.
Right. It's more about upholding their specific social structure, their understanding of purity and order. And remember, this was a patriarchal society where men and women had very clearly defined roles. Anything that blurred those lines, well, it could be seen as a threat.
Okay, that makes sense in the context of the time period. But what about Sodom and Gomorrah? That's the story that often gets brought up as the ultimate example of, biblical condemnation of homosexuality.
Yeah, Sodom and Gomorrah, it's definitely a story that's been interpreted that way for centuries. But like everything in the Hebrew Bible, it's more complex than that.
More complex. How so?
Well, remember what happens. The men of Sodom, they surround Lot's house, and they demand to know his visitors.
Right, right.
But that word know, it can have different meanings in Hebrew.
Oh, I see. So it might not be about consensual same-sex relationships at all.
Exactly. Some scholars believe that the real sin of Sodom wasn't homosexuality, it was a lack of hospitality and the threat of violence towards strangers. And then, violating the laws of hospitality, that was a huge offense.
Yeah, treating strangers with kindness and respect, that was a big deal in ancient cultures.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder why the text would draw parallels between Sodom and Gomorrah and that other story in the book of Judges where a Levite's concubine is brutally attacked.
Oh, right. And that story, it seems to be focused on violence and violation, not specifically homosexual acts.
Exactly. So maybe we need to reconsider how we interpret that Sodom and Gomorrah story.
Okay, so we've talked about Leviticus and the Holiness Code. We've talked about the complexities of the Sodom and Gomorrah story. But are there any stories in the Hebrew Bible that offer a different perspective? Ones that maybe don't focus on condemnation?
Well, there's one that often gets overlooked in these debates, the story of David and Jonathan.
David and Jonathan. Now that's an interesting one. The future king of Israel and the prince bound together by this really intense friendship.
And it's not just any friendship. The way their bond is described, it's full of passion and devotion. It uses language that's often associated with deep love, even romantic love, according to some scholars.
Wow, yeah. Like Jonathan gives David his royal robes and his weapons. That's a pretty big deal.
Huge. It's a symbolic gesture, almost like he's passing on a legacy, acknowledging their deep connection.
And when Jonathan dies, David's grief, it's just overwhelming.
He even says that his love for Jonathan was greater than the love of women. I mean, that's powerful stuff.
It is. It definitely pushes us to think beyond simple categories.
Right. So how do we reconcile a story like this, a story of such deep connection between two men, with those passages that seem to condemn same-sex acts? It's a challenge.
It really highlights the complexity of the Hebrew Bible. It's not a simple black and white text.
It's not, and that's what makes studying these ancient texts so fascinating. They force us to wrestle with nuance, with ambiguity, with the reality that people in the past didn't always see the world the way we do today.
So to kind of zoom out for a minute, we've gone from the gods of Mesopotamia to the pharaohs of Egypt, and now to the stories and laws of the Hebrew Bible. And I think the common thread here is, well, it's complexity. It's not a simple answer.
Exactly. We've seen that same-sex relationships were integrated into religious practices in Mesopotamia, viewed through the lens of cosmic order in Egypt, and addressed in these complex and multifaceted ways in the Hebrew Bible.
And the thing is, none of these cultures had a single monolithic view. There were different perspectives, different interpretations, just like there are today.
Right. These ancient texts, these ancient cultures, they offer us glimpses into the diversity of human experience throughout history.
And they remind us that our understanding of love, sexuality, relationships, it's constantly evolving.
It is, and maybe that's the biggest takeaway from all of this. The past is not a simple place. It's full of nuance, contradiction, and yes, complexity. And maybe, just maybe, that complexity can help us better understand ourselves and our world today.
Well said. I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive, and until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep learning.